Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that Frank Lloyd Wright designed buildings that changed the way people lived and worked? Learn how Wright became famous for creating the Prairie-style home that featured long, low roofs, rows of windows, and open living spaces that blended homes with their natural surroundings. Discover that years later, John Lloyd Wright, the second son of Frank Lloyd Wright, worked alongside his father and created Lincoln Logs, the iconic notched wooden building blocks that are still popular today.
How does a kid from rural Wisconsin, someone who literally spent his entire childhood just moving from town to town, end up designing over, 1,114 buildings, and in the process completely changed the way that we live indoors?
It's a staggering contradiction, honestly. I mean, you have a person with zero geographical roots, just completely untethered.
Right. And he grows up to literally anchor the American aesthetic to the earth.
Yeah, exactly.
So today on the Deep Dive, we are trying to figure out how that transient kid became Frank Lloyd Wright. I was reading through Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect of organic vision, along with some incredible archival material from the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation.
But there's so much good stuff in those archives.
There really is. And the thing that struck me immediately is that we often just look at his buildings as, these pretty iconic objects. But our mission today is to unpack the why. Like, why did his philosophy of living in harmony with nature resonate so deeply? And how did he actually engineer the spaces that you and I live and work in today?
Yeah, and to get to the why, we really have to look at the sheer scope of his life. I mean, we are talking about a career spanning 7 decades.
7 decades. That's just wild.
Right. He wasn't just hopping on design trends. He was driven by this deeply held belief that architecture shouldn't merely be functional. It shouldn't just be a box that keeps the rain off your head.
Right, a glorified umbrella.
Exactly. He believed it should actually give reason, rhyme, and meaning to life. But you're right to start with that contradiction, because the foundation of all that permanence was a childhood defined by just, constant movement.
Yeah, I was looking at his family tree in the sources, and it feels like a total clash of worlds. On one hand, you have his mother, Anna Lloyd Jones. She was a teacher from this large, incredibly established Welsh family that had essentially settled and developed the entire area of Spring Green, Wisconsin.
Which is a huge anchor.
Huge. So there's this deep generational connection to a very specific plot of land.
Right. But then you have his father, William Carey Wright. He was a preacher and a musician. And because of his ministry, the family was never still. I mean, they hopped from Rhode Island to Iowa to Massachusetts, constantly packing and unpacking.
Okay, let's unpack this. His early childhood sounds less like a traditional upbringing and more like he was constantly on tour with a traveling band or something.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Just bouncing from state to state, parsonage to parsonage.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense that he would eventually become obsessed with building things that looked like they literally grew out of the ground. He was searching for a permanent foundation.
What's fascinating here is that the search for a foundation became entirely literal when he was a teenager. So in 1885, when Frank was just 18 years old, his parents divorced.
Wow.
Yeah, which, was a massive upheaval in the late 19th century. And it forced him to step up and go to work to help support his mother and siblings.
At 18? That is wild to think about. I mean, today, an 18-year-old is stressing about passing their finals, and he is suddenly the breadwinner. But he already had a trajectory in mind, right? Like, he knew he wanted to build.
He did, but the way he started is what gave him a massive advantage over his peers. While he was taking classes at the University of Wisconsin, he got a job working for the dean. But he wasn't sitting in an architecture studio sketching, beautiful romantic facades.
Right.
He was working in the Department of Engineering.
Oh, that is a huge distinction. That means he is dealing with the highly unglamorous side of building.
Exactly. Working in an engineering department at that formative age provided him with a highly pragmatic structural foundation.
He's doing the math.
He's doing all the math. He was learning how things actually hold together under stress. He was learning about load-bearing walls, the physics of materials, the reality of gravity.
So later on, when he proposes these wild, seemingly impossible designs, he wasn't just some dreamer making a pretty picture.
No, not at all. He knew the mechanics of the earth.
Okay, so he has the math, the physics, and this deep psychological need for permanence. But how does a young kid actually break into the industry? How does he convince people to let him build their houses?
Well, the professional leap happens in 1887 when he moves to Chicago. He works for two different architectural firms briefly, but the pivotal moment is when he is hired by the highly prestigious firm of Adler and Sullivan.
Adler and Sullivan. That means he is working directly under Louis Sullivan, who is essentially a giant of early modern architecture.
Oh, absolutely. Louis Sullivan is the architect who built the Wainwright Building in St. Louis, which is widely considered one of the first skyscrapers in the world.
Right, a true pioneer.
Yeah. But Sullivan gave Wright something much more valuable than a paycheck. He gave him a guiding philosophy. Sullivan famously believed that form follows function.
We hear form follows function all the time today, but we have to remember how radical that was in the 1890s. I mean, back then, architecture was basically historical cosplay.
That's historical cosplay. That's exactly what it was.
You would build a modern bank, right? But you'd slap fake Roman columns and Greek pediments all over it just to make it look important. Sullivan was saying, no, a building's shape should be determined purely by what it's actually used for. Stop hiding it.
And that honesty in design had a profound influence on young Frank Lloyd Wright. But Wright took that concept and he pivoted.
Okay, how so?
Well, Sullivan was applying form follows function to towering commercial skyscrapers. Wright decided to apply it to domestic family life.
Which brings us to 1889. Wright is just 22 years old. He gets married, and he buys this wooded corner lot in the Chicago suburb of Oak Park to build his own family home.
The Oak Park home basically became his personal laboratory. He is taking his engineering background, he is taking Sullivan's philosophy, and he is physically experimenting with geometric shapes in the walls right around him.
Here's where it gets really interesting, but also where I have to push back a little. He was 22 when he designed this custom experimental geometric house for his family.
Yeah, 22.
Most 22-year-olds today are just trying to decipher the instructions on how to assemble basic flat-pack furniture. Isn't it incredibly arrogant to think you've figured out the perfect way for a family to live before you've even really lived yourself?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it absolutely borders on arrogance. But Wright was famously headstrong. He possessed an unshakable confidence in his own vision.
I'll say.
He didn't just want to build a shelter. He wanted to orchestrate how his family interacted. For example, as he had children, and they had 6 in total, he added a playroom to the house.
But not just any playroom.
Right. It wasn't just a room with a toy box. It had a massive barrel-vaulted ceiling, a Roman brick fireplace, and it was entirely driven by stark, interlocking geometric design principles. He believed that exposing children to specific proportions and natural materials would literally shape their minds.
And the craziest detail from the sources is that it actually worked.
It really did.
His son, John Lloyd Wright, grew up playing in this incredibly structured, wooden, geometric environment. And he was so inspired by the interlocking beams of his childhood home that he grew up and invented Lincoln Logs.
It is such a brilliant detail. The toy that millions of kids have used to learn basic building concepts stems directly from Frank Lloyd Wright's experimental playroom in Oak Park.
It's amazing.
It really proves Wright's theory that the spaces we inhabit fundamentally shape our development.
But that confidence, or, arrogance, couldn't be contained to his own property line for long. By 1893, he opens his own independent business. He was ready to take these geometric experiments to the public.
His very first independent commission was the William H. Winslow House. And right away, the public realizes this is something entirely new.
What made it stand out?
The Winslow House featured this broad, sheltering roof that just seemed to hover over the building. Critics praised it for its simple elegance, which was a radical departure from the cluttered, fussy Victorian homes of the era.
And over the next 16 years, he refines this into what makes him an absolute legend, which is the Prairie style. The sources list the defining characteristics as long, low-pitched roofs, deep overhangs that stretch way out past the walls, and long, continuous rows of windows.
And crucially, no attics and no basements.
Right. And as a homeowner, I have to ask on behalf of everyone listening, hold on, no attics and no basements. Where did people put all their junk?
I know, it sounds crazy.
It sounds like a minimalist nightmare.
It definitely forces a lifestyle change, absolutely. But let's look at the mechanics of why he did it. First, the basement. Traditionally, a basement requires digging a deep hole, which psychologically and physically separates the main living floor from the earth.
Oh, I see.
Yet Wright pioneered the use of a concrete slab built directly on grade. He literally anchored the floor to the soil.
And the attic.
Well, an attic stretches a house vertically. By eliminating both the basement pulling down and the attic stretching up, Wright forced the volume of the home to spread outward horizontally.
I like the landscape itself.
Exactly. He was matching the long, flat horizons of the American Midwest prairie. But to answer your practical question about the junk, Wright designed extensive built-in cabinetry and furniture into the walls themselves.
So he didn't just design the walls, he designed the dressers and the bookshelves, which again speaks to that intense controlling nature.
Oh, very controlling.
I've read stories where he would actually sneak into his clients' houses after they moved in and rearrange their furniture because they had ruined his vision. He would literally screw dining room chairs to the floor so they couldn't be moved.
It is entirely true. He believed the architect was responsible for the entire environment. If we look at the prairie style, it is really helpful to contrast it with the standard home of the day.
You mean the traditional Victorian house? They were tall, stiff, and broken up into a million tiny separated rooms. You'd have a parlor, a sitting room, a formal dining room, all walled off from each other. They were like these rigid boxes sitting awkwardly on top of the grass. Looking at the prairie style, it is like taking off a stiff, restrictive Victorian corset and finally allowing a house to breathe.
But taking off that corset didn't just let the house stretch out on the outside. It completely destroyed those rigid interior walls you mentioned. Wright effectively invented the open floor plan.
Wow, really?
Yeah. By getting rid of all those little boxy rooms, he created spaces where the living room, the dining area, and the library bled seamlessly into one another. He usually placed a massive central masonry fireplace right at the core of the house and let all the other rooms radiate outward from that warm center.
That changes the entire sociology of the family. You aren't closed off in separate rooms anymore. You are sharing a flowing, continuous space.
And he perfected this in some of his most famous residential works. You have the Darwin D. Martin House in Buffalo, New York in 1903.
Stunning house.
The Avery Coonley House in Illinois in 1907. And perhaps the absolute masterpiece of this era, the Frederick C. Roby House in Chicago, completed in 1908.
Let's talk about the Roby House for a second, because it looks like a ship gliding across the prairie. It has these massive cantilevered roofs.
The cantilevers are where his engineering background really shines. So a cantilever is a long projecting beam or roof that is supported only on one end.
Which sounds impossible for wood to do.
Right. To make those massive wooden roofs stretch out so far without sagging or breaking, Wright secretly hid steel beams inside the wood.
But why stretch the roof out so far in the first place? Was it just to look cool?
Not at all. It is a highly tuned environmental machine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Wright calculated the exact angle of the sun. Those deep overhangs were engineered so that in the middle of summer, when the sun is high in the sky, the roof blocks the harsh sunlight, keeping the house cool.
Okay.
But in the winter, when the sun dips low on the horizon, the sunlight slips right under the overhangs and streams through those continuous rows of windows, passively heating the house.
That is brilliant. He is using the architecture to manage the climate decades before we had smart thermostats.
Exactly.
He is truly building the house to fit into its natural surroundings and utilize nature rather than fighting against it.
But Wright's philosophy of blending form, function, and nature was so successful in homes that he realized it didn't just have to apply to where people slept. If he could change the sociology of a family, he could change the psychology of a worker or a worshiper.
So he starts scaling the vision. He begins taking on major public and commercial buildings. The sources highlight two massive early achievements. The Larkin Company Administration Building in Buffalo, built in 1903, and Unity Temple in Oak Park, built in 1905.
Two incredibly important buildings.
But how do you take a philosophy about nature and the prairie and apply it to a giant corporate office building?
By adapting to the reality of the environment. See, the Larkin building was located right next to a massive, incredibly noisy, and polluted rail yard.
Yikes.
Yeah, Wright couldn't open the building up to nature because the nature outside was toxic smoke and loud trains.
So what does he do?
He turns the building inward. He seals it off from the outside world entirely.
Really?
He built a massive multi-story open atrium right in the center of the building, capped with a giant glass skylight. All the desks and balconies faced inward toward this atrium.
So the workers are flooded with natural light from above rather than staring out windows at a dirty rail yard.
Exactly. And because the building was sealed, he engineered one of the very first commercial air conditioning and circulation systems to keep the air fresh.
That's way ahead of its time.
He even designed custom metal desks with attached chairs so the floors were easy to clean. He created an environment that fostered a sense of community among the workers, almost like a corporate family gathered around that central atrium of light.
It's that same open floor plan concept, just scaled up for an entire company.
Yeah.
And then he does something similar, but for the soul, with Unity Temple.
Unity Temple is fascinating because he had a very tight budget from the congregation. Traditional stone or brick was just too expensive, so Wright chose to build it out of poured concrete.
Poured concrete. For a church, that sounds like a parking garage.
It does, but remember his engineering mind. Concrete is cheap, but it can be molded into monumental, boulder-like shapes. He treated the concrete like an extension of the earth. And the genius of Unity Temple is in how you move through it. You don't just walk through a front door into a big room.
Right, I've seen the floor plans for this.
Mm-hmm.
He makes you take this twisting, turning path. You enter through these dark, compressed, low-ceilinged corridors.
That compression is completely intentional. He forces you to navigate this tight, slightly uncomfortable space, which quiets your mind and strips away the noise of the street outside.
Okay.
And then suddenly you turn a corner and step into the main sanctuary. The ceiling soars upward, the space explodes outward, and you are bathed in natural light coming from high up near the ceiling.
So what does this all mean? He goes from engineering a cantilevered roof to literally engineering a psychological release in the human brain. You walk out of the dark and into the light.
This raises an important question, though. How many spaces actually do that for us today?
Not many. The sources note that he designed over 1,114 buildings across his 70-year career. He wasn't just working. He was on a crusade.
Yeah.
He was fundamentally altering the way we physically and emotionally move through our daily lives.
By the time he passed away in 1959, he had completely dismantled the Victorian box. He proved that changing the physical shape of a workspace or a spiritual space fundamentally changes the person inside it.
Yeah.
If you remove the claustrophobic walls, you change the worker, you change the worshiper, you change the family.
And I think that brings us beautifully to a quote from the sources. It's from 1957, near the very end of his life, and it perfectly encapsulates this crusade, Recoin. The mission of an architect is to help people understand how to make life more beautiful, the world a better one for living in, and to give reason, rhyme, and meaning to life.
It completely redefines what a building is supposed to do. I mean, a building isn't a passive object. It is an active participant in your well-being. It's a machine for beautiful living.
So I want to turn that directly to you, the listener. Think about the rooms you spend your time in. Look around right now. Does the place where you live help make your life more meaningful? Are you living in a restrictive, compartmentalized box? Or are you in a space that lets you breathe and connect with the outside world?
I think the most powerful takeaway here requires looking at our modern world through Wright's eyes. He spent his life ensuring that a house in the American Midwest looked like the prairie, heavily anchored and horizontal. He believed buildings must be organic to their specific local environment.
Which really makes you wonder what he would think of our cities today. I mean, we take the exact same identical floor-to-ceiling glass and steel skyscraper, and we drop it into the freezing, snowy winters of New York City, and then we drop that exact same glass box into the scorching 100-degree desert of Dubai.
It's the antithesis of everything he believed. We use massive amounts of artificial energy to fight the local climate, rather than designing buildings that work with it. If form follows function, perhaps our modern architecture has just lost its way.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The ultimate goal shouldn't be conquering nature with identical synthetic boxes. It should be figuring out how to erase the boundary between the rooms we live in and the specific earth we stand on.
It is a profound challenge to modern design, and it's incredibly poetic when you look back at where he started. That kid from rural Wisconsin who spent his childhood on the road just packing and unpacking. He didn't just want to build a house for himself. He spent 70 years and over 1,000 buildings trying to engineer a world where human beings finally truly belong to the earth they stand on.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.